With the Premier League season just around the corner, it is time to have a think about the dreaded sack race. Yes, in this video, we are going to talk about the managers that seem to be the most vulnerable beyond the big six anyway, because certainly a couple of them could be on the chopping board before long. But yes, we're going to look at who are the potential candidates for an early sacking in the Premier League. So who are the contenders? Well, I don't like to talk about the bookies all too much, but I will look at their favourites. And Keith Andrews is the current bookies favourite, which isn't really all that surprising with the turmoil that Brentford have had this summer, losing their manager and Thomas Frank. They've also lost players as well, big players for them. Brian Mbeumo, it looks like Jan Wissa could go, Christian Norgaard's left. So there's been a lot of change at Brentford. It feels like a lot of people aren't that high on them this season. A lot of people think that they're going to struggle. And I think Brentford see themselves as an established Premier League club. So if they are brought into an early sort of battle, is it possible they'll make a change there? I've referenced before on this channel, it reminds me a little bit of like when Chris Hutchins followed Paul Jewell at Wigan. He followed him at Bradford as well, where a coach comes in and he just can't replicate what the manager had done previously. But what I would say is the big asterisks to this is that Brentford are very good at recruiting and they still haven't really replaced the players they've lost, and I think they will do that. So their squad will be better, certainly come the end of the transfer window. And I also think they're no mugs when it comes to managerial appointments. They've done a lot of internal appointments at Brentford, and this one could be another masterstroke. So I understand the sentiment towards Keith Andrews and his potential struggles. And look, I don't disagree. I think Brentford will struggle this season. I think they are vulnerable to falling out of the Premier League. And I think of the established 17 that are in there, Brentford are probably in the weakest position right now. But I certainly wouldn't be shocked if Keith Andrews is able to continue a lot of the good work that Thomas Frank had done. So yeah, not surprised that Keith Andrews is the favourite. Could see if Brentford had a shaky start of the season that they'd maybe make an early change. Do I think he'll win this race? I don't know. I'd probably say that they'll give him quite a bit of time. I don't think Brentford are going to be knee-jerk in their decision-making. And the number 2 favourite is Daniel Farke at Leeds. And on the face of it, I think if you were to look at his achievements at Leeds and what he's done, there would be a bit of a surprise that he's in this list. But I think overall the context, the fact that at the end of the season there was rumours that Leeds were potentially looking to move on from Farke, and I think as well his record in the Premier League at Norwich, which could be totally unfair to judge him on that because Norwich had not really spent much money, whereas Leeds have had a proper go at it this summer. But I think the reason why he is under threat owes to A, them rumours at the end of the season, but B, like Leeds haven't messed about in this transfer market. They have built a team to try and survive in the Premier League, and I think they, maybe unlike say Sunderland, I think would not sack Reggie Slabry unless they'd lost all 20 of their first 20 games in the season. I don't think Sunderland would make that change, whereas I think Leeds would. Like, I think Leeds, if they were bottom of the league after, I'd say, 10 games and they hadn't won a game yet, I could very much see them going, right, we need to pivot and do something else. So I can see why he's on this list. And I think Farke has to start the season quite well for Leeds to really assure everyone that he's a Premier League manager and he's the right man to take Leeds forward. Another manager who has just been newly promoted, Scott Parker, is up there with the favourites to be sacked. And again, it's understandable, kind of for the similar reasons to Daniel Farke, is that his record in the Premier League is not particularly good. Burnley last season were brilliant defensively. They had a crazy just amount of clean sheets and they only conceded like, I think 16 goals, which is mad. There was a vast overperformance of XG, which, you know, people can look at and say, well, you're losing James Trafford and losing Egan Riley. Have they lost some of what they had last season? And they have lost other players as well in that team. They've also recruited, of course, this summer and brought in players like Kyle Walker and Armando Broja. So maybe they'll cancel each other out. But I can definitely see why Parker is on the early sort of chopping board, so to speak, because his record isn't that good. And I think people think Burnley are going to struggle this season. I think there seems to be not much hype around them right now, and people seem to think that they are going to make the numbers up this season, maybe a little bit unlike Sunderland and Leeds. I think people seem to have a bit more optimism around Sunderland and Leeds, and that might just because, you know, they've made flashier signings. But I can see that if Burnley aren't defensively solid at the start of the season and do struggle, they also play Sunderland at home in their second game, which is massive for both. But I think that's even bigger for Burnley. You can't afford to lose against a newly promoted team in your first home game of the season. I can certainly see if they struggled and got off to a rocky start, maybe did lose that game against Sunderland, I could see the Burnley owners getting, you know, a little bit twitchy. When Vincent Kompany was with them in the Premier League last time, they didn't like divert from that plan at all. They were like, yeah, this is what we're committed with, and we're going to go at the end of the season. So it could be that Scott Parker will get the season. They'll stick with it. They stuck with Vincent Kompany through the good and the bad. So they could do that again. It is the same ownership group there. But I think Scott Parker is definitely vulnerable this season. And to be honest, I'd be pretty shocked if him and Daniel Farke, if both of them made it at the end of the season as managers. I'd be shocked. I think one of them would be sacked this season, because I just think that it's unlikely that both will have a strong season. And I just think them two clubs will make changes if they feel that it's necessary. The other manager that's in there is a favourite. It was Nuno Espirito Santo, but I don't know. It feels harsh to put him in this sack race. He had such a good year last year, and yes, the owner of Nottingham Forest is, a bit chaotic, it's fair to say, but I don't think Nuno Espirito Santo is particularly vulnerable. And the next manager on the list who I actually think could win this race is Graham Potter. I just think that hasn't been a good fit at West Ham, and I've talked on this channel before that I think West Ham could be, vulnerable to potentially being relegated. I think they're not great on paper. They've got quite an aging team. I think there is work to do in the transfer market. I know they have brought in a new goalkeeper now, but I still think there's more to do there. I worry about the forward line in particular, and they've been tipped by many to struggle this season. And I don't think the West Ham ownership and club feel like they should be a team that's struggling, even though for me on paper they are one of the weaker Premier League sides. They're definitely a bottom third Premier League team. So I can certainly see, again, West Ham, I mentioned with Burnley, they play Sunderland early on. Well, West Ham have Sunderland away on the opening day. And if they struggle in that game and can't, struggle to really get going in the early goings of the season, I could see West Ham making a decision there. I just don't. To me, it just doesn't feel right. I don't think Graham Potter and West Ham's a great marriage, and I can see both parties, potentially seeing that early in the season. But anyway, let me know what you think about the sack race, because it's always interesting. It's an indication. Sometimes early season sackings can change a team's season for the good. Look at Wolves last season. They moved on from Gary O'Neill, and it worked brilliant for them, with Vitor Pereira coming in there, and they ended up having a pretty solid season in the end. And there's plenty of teams that have done the sack and then stayed up come the end of the season. I mean, I'm a Sunderland fan, so I am aware that being in the Premier League, you can sack a manager early in the season, and it can be the sort of bit of ammunition you need to stay up. So, look, it's not necessarily a bad thing to sack a manager early on, but I'd be curious to know what you think, though. Let me know in the comments who you think will win the sack race. Is there any managers that haven't been mentioned here? There's some in there that I was surprised were such sort of low odds. Eddie Howe was one that was quite low odds this season. I know Newcastle are a bit chaotic, but won a trophy last season, so I didn't include him in this video because I just don't think it's realistic. I don't think Newcastle would move on. I don't think the fans would tolerate that, but yeah, he was up there as well. And then, you've got like Ruben Amorim, who, Man United manager, he was up there as being a potential early sacking. So, I don't know. Who do you think will win the sack race or lose the sack race? I don't know the best way to put this. Win, lose, I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments though, and we'll catch you for the next video on Beyond the Big Six.